Tyler Gray, the seemingly charming Amazon warehouse manager, had always admired Emma Clarke from afar, until the day she ended their brief, one-sided relationship. What started as a friendly connection quickly spiraled into an obsessive pursuit, one that would end in a deadly confrontation. When Emma finally tried to escape Tyler's suffocating grip, she had no idea how far he was willing to go to make her his. What began as an innocent workplace interaction would soon turn into a chilling tale of obsession, danger, and betrayal. In a bustling Amazon warehouse on the outskirts of a quiet town, Emma Clarke quickly established herself as a hardworking and ambitious employee. At just 25, she was eager to make a name for herself, putting in long hours and always going above and beyond in her work. She was the type of person who had an infectious energy that made her well liked by her colleagues. Among those colleagues was Tyler Gray, a warehouse manager in his late 30s, who had been with Amazon for several years. Tyler was charismatic, well groomed, and had a knack for making people feel comfortable in his presence. He had risen through the ranks over the years, but his position as manager made him somewhat of a mystery to Emma at first. They first started talking one afternoon when Emma struggled to meet a particularly challenging deadline. Tyler, noticing her frustration, casually stopped by her station and offered his help. He wasn't required to assist with the task, but his offer felt genuine and Emma appreciated the support. After that, their interactions became more frequent. Tyler would stop by Emma's work area to check in, offering advice, tips, and often bringing her small snacks or a coffee. At first, it all seemed harmless. Emma thought of Tyler as a mentor, someone who had been in the company for longer and knew how things worked. As the weeks went by, Tyler's presence in Emma's life grew more pronounced. He would go out of his way to walk her to her car after shifts, giving her tips on how to navigate the company's hierarchy, how to ask for promotions, or how to deal with difficult coworkers. Emma was flattered by the attention, and although she never thought of him as more than a friendly coworker, she enjoyed the conversations. He often spoke about his own experiences and the challenges he had faced, which made Emma feel a connection to him. Tyler, however, was beginning to see things differently. His admiration for Emma had evolved into something deeper, something far more intense. To him, Emma wasn't just another colleague. She had become the object of his obsession. He saw in her a woman who was kind, intelligent, and determined, and in his mind, they shared an unspoken connection. Tyler would watch Emma from a distance when she wasn't looking, admiring the way she handled herself with others, the way she carried herself with such ease and confidence. His feelings, though unspoken, were growing stronger each day, but he didn't know how to express them. He began to look for small excuses to talk to her. At lunch breaks, he would sit near her, just to be close. He would make lighthearted comments about her work ethic or tell her she was doing a great job. But there was always something more behind his words, a deeper level of admiration that Emma never fully understood. As time went on, Tyler began to show up in places Emma wasn't expecting him. Sometimes he would appear in the break room just when she was getting coffee. Other times, he would offer to help her with tasks that she was perfectly capable of completing on her own. Emma couldn't help but notice how often Tyler was around, but she brushed it off as a friendly gesture. He was, after all, a manager, and it was his job to check in on everyone. But as Tyler's attentions toward Emma grew more persistent, a subtle shift began to take place. Emma started feeling like the friendly gestures were becoming more intrusive, especially as Tyler began to shower her with little gifts, often leaving notes of encouragement on her desk. These were small things, but they made Emma uncomfortable. She had no idea what to make of Tyler's behavior. She didn't want to hurt his feelings, so she smiled and thanked him, even as her discomfort slowly grew. The lines between friendship and obsession had already begun to blur in Tyler's mind, though Emma remained oblivious to it all. She continued to focus on her work, not realizing that her relationship with Tyler was heading toward a dangerous turning point. Tyler's feelings, buried beneath layers of charm and kindness, were beginning to surface in ways that would soon become impossible to ignore. As the weeks passed, Emma's unease grew. She had always appreciated kindness, but Tyler's constant presence began to feel less like friendly support and more like an intrusion. At first, she told herself it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. Tyler was, after all, a manager, and his attention to her work was simply part of his job. But as the days went by, it became clear that his gestures were no longer just professional. The small acts of kindness had transformed into something deeper, something that Emma didn't know how to handle. Tyler's behavior became more invasive. He started waiting for Emma outside the building after shifts, offering to drive her home even when she had her own car. His persistence made her uncomfortable, especially since she had made it clear several times that she didn't need a ride. She appreciated his concern, but it began to feel suffocating. The more she politely declined, the more Tyler seemed determined to offer. His presence in her life, though initially flattering, began to feel like an unwelcome shadow. Emma spoke to her close friend, Lauren Gray, about the situation. Lauren, who had worked with both Emma and Tyler for some time, was immediately concerned. She had always known Tyler to be a little too charming for his own good, but what Emma described went beyond friendly attention. Lauren had noticed the way Tyler would linger near Emma's station, the way his eyes would follow her across the warehouse. It didn't take long for her to realize that Tyler's interest in Emma wasn't just about work. It was personal. Lauren advised Emma to set clear boundaries with Tyler. She suggested that Emma be more direct with him, telling him in no uncertain terms that she valued their professional relationship but wasn't interested in pursuing anything beyond that. Emma hesitated. She didn't want to upset Tyler or make things awkward at work. But deep down, she knew Lauren was right. Something needed to change. A few days later, Emma decided to confront Tyler. She caught him in the break room during a lunch break, his usual place of lurking, and calmly told him that while she appreciated his friendship, she didn't feel the same way he seemed to about her. She told him that she wanted to keep things professional and didn't want to be in a relationship. Tyler's response was calm, almost too calm, but Emma could sense the tension building beneath his composed exterior. He nodded, said he understood, and walked away. At first, Emma felt relieved, thinking that the conversation had cleared the air. She hoped that Tyler would respect her wishes and that things would go back to normal. But she was wrong. Over the next few days, his behavior took a darker turn. He began to monitor her work schedule more closely, asking her colleagues about her personal life in a way that seemed less like genuine curiosity and more like an attempt to control her. He started showing up at odd times to check in on her, hovering over her workspace in a way that felt stifling. Emma began to feel trapped. Every time she saw Tyler, she was reminded of the conversation they had, and it only made her more anxious. It was as if Tyler was pretending to accept her decision, but underneath, he was plotting his next move. His jealousy became apparent when he noticed Emma spending more time with Marcelo, a coworker she had grown close to. Tyler would frequently ask her how things were going with Marcelo, sometimes with a tone that felt laced with accusation. Emma brushed it off, thinking it was just workplace small talk, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Tyler was watching her every move. As the days went on, Tyler's obsessive behavior became more apparent. Emma started to avoid him when she could, taking different routes to her car, staying later to miss him, and even asking Lauren to walk with her to her car after shifts. She felt increasingly isolated, as if the walls around her were closing in. But no matter what she did, Tyler seemed to be everywhere. It was as if he was waiting for her to slip up, waiting for her to give him another chance, though Emma had made it clear that there would be none. Tyler, however, refused to let go. His obsession with Emma had turned into something dangerous. The rejection that he couldn't quite process had festered within him, becoming an uncontrollable need to regain the connection he believed they shared. It was no longer about friendship, it was about possession. One evening, after weeks of awkward encounters and mounting discomfort, Emma decided to take control of the situation. She had hoped that things would naturally settle after the conversation with Tyler, but his increasingly intrusive behavior made it clear that she could no longer avoid confronting him directly. The more time passed, the more her anxiety grew. Tyler's presence at the warehouse, his constant monitoring of her, and the growing tension made her realize that she had to make her boundaries clear once again. It was no longer just about being uncomfortable. It had become a matter of safety. After finishing a particularly long shift, Emma found herself standing in the quiet break room, nervously running her fingers through her hair. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She had rehearsed the conversation in her head for days, but now that the moment had come, it felt harder than she imagined. Tyler had just finished his shift and was lingering in the break room, as usual. He smiled when he saw her, but there was an intensity in his eyes that made Emma's stomach churn. This time, she knew that she had to speak up. She walked up to him, her heart pounding. She started with a few pleasantries, trying to ease into the conversation. But Tyler's focused attention and the way he leaned toward her made it impossible to keep the conversation light. Emma quickly realized that there would be no subtle way to break things off. She had to be firm and direct. "Tyler, I need to talk to you about something," Emma said, her voice steady despite the nerves that gripped her. "I've been thinking a lot about our relationship, and I just want to make it clear that I'm not interested in anything more than a professional connection. I really value our work relationship, but that's all it can be." Tyler's expression shifted slightly, but he nodded as if he understood. Emma hoped that this would be the end of it. She had said what needed to be said. But even as she finished speaking, there was something unsettling about the way Tyler looked at her. His face was unreadable, his eyes colder than she remembered. He said nothing for a moment, just staring at her as if weighing her words. "Of course, Emma," Tyler said finally, his tone smooth, but there was an undercurrent of something darker. "I respect that. I just thought you should know that I really care about you. I hope we can still be friends." Emma nodded awkwardly, her unease growing. She forced a smile, told him she appreciated his understanding, and made an excuse to leave the break room. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There was a finality in Tyler's tone that made her wonder whether he truly accepted her rejection, or if he was just pretending. Over the next few days, Emma tried to put the conversation behind her. She focused on her work, spent more time with her friends, and tried to move on. She thought maybe things would settle down and return to normal, but that was not to be. Tyler continued to hover around her, though now with an eerie calmness. He wasn't as outwardly persistent as before, but his behavior had taken on a more subtle form. He would often show up in places where Emma was, offering unsolicited advice or commenting on how well she was doing. It felt as if he was trying to maintain some sort of connection, a connection that Emma had made it clear was no longer welcome. The most unsettling change, however, was how Tyler started to act when she spent time with Marcello. Emma had always felt comfortable around Marcello, and the two had grown closer over time, bonding over their shared work challenges and late-night shifts. But every time Tyler saw them talking or laughing together, he seemed to grow distant, his eyes darkening with a look that Emma couldn't quite interpret. At first, she thought it was just a coincidence, but then it became undeniable. Tyler's questions about Marcello became pointed, almost accusatory. He would ask about the time they spent together, how often they spoke, and whether Emma had plans with Marcello outside of work. It was as if Tyler was trying to control who Emma interacted with, questioning every relationship she had. Emma could feel the tension building, and she began to grow wary of Tyler's every move. She started taking different routes to her car, avoiding areas of the warehouse where she knew Tyler might be. She confided in Lauren again, who expressed her concern that Tyler's obsession was growing dangerously close to something more sinister. But even as Emma took steps to distance herself, Tyler's presence seemed inescapable. The more she tried to withdraw, the more Tyler's actions seemed to escalate. He would appear uninvited during breaks, linger near her station, and even try to engage her in conversation when she was clearly occupied. Emma could no longer ignore the fact that Tyler was not respecting her boundaries. What had started as harmless gestures had now transformed into something far more threatening. The calm exterior that Tyler presented was beginning to crack, and beneath it, Emma could sense the growing intensity of his obsession. She feared that this wasn't the end of it, that something darker was brewing just below the surface. The tension between Emma and Tyler had reached a breaking point. Emma had done everything she could to avoid him, to set clear boundaries, but Tyler's obsessive behavior only seemed to grow more intense. Every interaction with him left her feeling more isolated, trapped in a situation that was becoming increasingly impossible to escape. Despite her best efforts to remain polite and professional, Tyler's obsession had shifted into something darker, something she couldn't ignore any longer. One evening, after a long shift, Emma stayed behind in the warehouse to finish up some paperwork. The building was mostly empty, save for a few late-night workers. She thought she would be able to quietly finish her tasks and head home without encountering Tyler. But as the clock ticked closer to midnight, Emma felt an unsettling presence in the otherwise quiet warehouse. She glanced up and saw Tyler standing in the shadows, watching her from across the room. He had been there for some time, and the sight of him made a chill run down her spine. At first, Emma tried to ignore him, hoping he would leave. She focused on her work, hoping to finish quickly. But the longer she worked, the more she could feel his eyes on her. She knew Tyler well enough to understand that this wasn't just a casual visit. He had been waiting for the right moment. Finally, unable to concentrate any longer, Emma stood up and walked toward the door, planning to leave as quickly as possible. But Tyler moved toward her, blocking her way. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that made Emma's heart race. She tried to remain calm, but fear was creeping into her thoughts. "Tyler, please," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm done for the night. I just want to go home." Tyler didn't move. Instead, he stared at her, his gaze dark and intense. There was a weight to his silence, a tension that hung in the air. Emma felt a sense of dread settle over her, her instincts telling her that something was about to happen, something she couldn't control. He took a step closer, his voice soft but firm. "I just wanted to talk, Emma. We haven't really talked in a while, have we?" he said, his words calculated, measured. Emma could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She didn't want to engage with him, didn't want to be anywhere near him, but she knew it was no use trying to avoid the inevitable confrontation. "Tyler, I told you before, I'm not interested. I just want to focus on my work. Please, I need to go." For a moment, Tyler stood still, his face unreadable. Then, without warning, his expression hardened. He took another step toward her, his movements slow but deliberate. Emma's heart raced, her pulse quickening as she realized she had no way of getting around him. The silence between them grew thick, suffocating. Tyler's next words were barely a whisper, but they sent a shiver down Emma's spine. "You think you can just shut me out? You can't do that, Emma. You don't understand what I've done for you, what I've sacrificed for you. We were meant to be together. I know that. I've always known it." Emma's mind was racing, her thoughts a blur of fear and disbelief. She had never seen him like this, so cold, so detached from reality. His words were those of someone who couldn't accept rejection, someone who had crossed a line between admiration and obsession. She stepped back, trying to put distance between them, but Tyler followed her. In that moment, Emma realized how far Tyler had gone off the edge. He wasn't just a man hurt by rejection. He was a man who had become consumed by it, willing to do anything to make her see things his way. His obsession had turned into something uncontrollable, and Emma was caught in the eye of the storm. Her breathing quickened as she felt panic set in. She could no longer deny the danger she was in. Tyler was no longer a man she could reason with. He had become someone who saw her as his possession, someone who could not bear the thought of losing her. He wasn't going to let her go, not without a fight. Emma's mind raced as she frantically searched for an escape. She had no way of knowing how far Tyler was willing to go. But in that moment, she understood that his obsession had driven him to the point of no return. She was no longer just a coworker in his eyes. She was the object of his twisted desire, and he wasn't about to let her slip away so easily. Desperation surged within her as she tried to push past him, but Tyler's grip on her arm tightened. His fingers dug into her skin, a painful reminder of the control he now believed he had over her. Emma struggled, trying to break free, but the fear that consumed her made it hard to think clearly. Tyler's grip only tightened as he pulled her closer, his eyes wild with a madness that she had never seen before. In that moment, everything Emma had feared became a harsh reality. The man who had once been a mentor, a friendly coworker, had become something else entirely, someone capable of unspeakable actions to get what he wanted. And Emma was caught in the middle of it all, trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. The situation with Tyler had escalated far beyond what Emma had feared. As she struggled against his grip, she realized there was no escaping him. The calm, rational manager she once knew had disappeared, replaced by someone completely unrecognizable. The man before her, eyes wild and full of a dangerous obsession, wasn't just a coworker anymore. He had become a threat. She had no choice but to fight back. Emma's heart raced as panic set in, her thoughts clouded by the overwhelming fear coursing through her veins. She knew she had to do something, but she couldn't think clearly with Tyler holding her so tightly. His presence was suffocating, and his grip felt like iron, pulling her closer despite her desperate attempts to break free. She kicked out with her leg, catching him off guard, and for a moment she was able to wrench her arm from his grasp. It was enough to create a small window of opportunity. Without thinking, Emma ran. She bolted toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the empty warehouse, but Tyler was close behind. She could hear his footsteps pounding in the distance, gaining on her. Her mind was racing. She had to get to safety. She didn't know where she was running or how she would escape, but she knew she couldn't let him catch her. Every step felt like an eternity, the fear in her chest threatening to swallow her whole. As she reached the parking lot, she spotted her car. Her heart pounded in her chest as she scrambled toward it, fumbling with her keys. The world felt like it was moving in slow motion, and every second counted. She could hear Tyler's voice, now twisted with frustration and anger, shouting her name. He was closing in. Emma's hands shook as she unlocked the car door and slid inside, slamming it shut behind her. She started the engine without hesitation, the car roaring to life. Tyler reached the car just as Emma threw it into reverse, but he wasn't fast enough to stop her. She slammed her foot on the gas, her car lurching forward as she sped out of the parking lot, the headlights reflecting off the empty warehouse behind her. For a moment, she thought she had escaped. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her hands trembling on the steering wheel as the adrenaline began to wear off. But even as she drove away, her mind kept replaying the moments before. Tyler's grip on her arm, his twisted words, the look in his eyes. It was as if the danger wasn't over, even though she had put miles between herself and the warehouse. Emma didn't stop driving. She couldn't. She didn't want to risk going back to her apartment, where she knew she would be vulnerable. She drove aimlessly, hoping to outrun the fear that clung to her, but it followed her wherever she went. The next few hours felt like a blur. She drove down winding roads, past quiet streets, her mind spinning with confusion and dread. It wasn't until the sun began to rise, the first light of dawn casting long shadows on the road, that Emma finally allowed herself to pull over. She was exhausted, her body aching from the stress, but she couldn't rest. Not yet. She reached for her phone and with trembling hands dialed Lauren's number. It rang several times before her friend picked up. "Emma, where are you?" Lauren's voice was thick with concern, but Emma couldn't speak. The only sound that came from her was a strangled sob, her body shaking uncontrollably. Lauren didn't hesitate. "I'm coming to get you. Stay where you are. I'm not letting you be alone." Emma's relief was immediate, but so was the overwhelming sense of dread. The fact that she could no longer go back to her life as it had been before Tyler's obsession consumed her, terrified her. Emma realized that she wasn't just dealing with a rejected coworker anymore. Tyler had become someone who was willing to go to any lengths to possess her, and that kind of obsession didn't just disappear. As Lauren drove to find her, Emma sat in the car, staring at the road ahead. It felt as though the world had shifted, that everything she had known was suddenly no longer safe. Emma knew she couldn't go back to the warehouse. She couldn't face Tyler again. But she also knew that the damage had already been done. Tyler's obsession with her would not fade quietly. It was only a matter of time before his obsession led him to cross a line he would never return from. The next morning, Emma learned that her fears had not been unfounded. Tyler had been arrested for stalking, harassment, and attempted assault. The police had found security footage from the warehouse that confirmed what Emma had been too terrified to speak about. Tyler had been following her for weeks, watching her every move, even when she thought he was out of sight. The footage showed his escalating behavior, his obsession with her reaching a terrifying peak. The authorities discovered that Tyler had planned to confront Emma, convinced that she was the only one who could make him happy. The truth of his actions shocked everyone who had worked with him, even those who knew him best. Tyler was no longer the charming manager they had once admired. He was a man who had become consumed by a dangerous obsession, someone who had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. For Emma, the aftermath was just beginning. Though she was physically safe, the trauma of the experience would stay with her forever. Tyler's obsession had left scars that no one could see. But in time, she would find the strength to rebuild, knowing that she had survived the nightmare. She would never forget the lesson that had come at such a high cost, that sometimes the people we trust the most can turn into the very ones who threaten our safety, and that, no matter how hard we try to escape, the shadows of obsession can linger long after the danger has passed.